The late afternoon light cast long shadows across the weathered truck as Matthew Hayes guided it along the winding country road into Mapleton, Michigan. The speedometer needle trembled just as much as his hopes for what lay ahead. At 42, his face carried the weight of someone who'd seen too much crow's feet deepening around gray-blue eyes that remained alert despite exhaustion. His dark hair, prematurely streaked with silver at the temples, hadn't seen proper styling in weeks. Scout, his German shepherd, with silver cream fur and amber eyes, sat vigilantly in the passenger seat. The dog's ears twitched constantly, picking up frequencies beyond human perception, a gift that had saved lives in Afghanistan, though not everyone's. In the back seat, 10-year-old Emma slept, her small frame curled around a backpack containing everything she couldn't bear to leave behind. A dog-eared book of fairy tales, a science kit missing half its pieces. The last birthday card her mother had sent before deciding family life was incompatible with her career ambitions. The truck's engine made an ominous clicking sound as they passed the town's welcome sign. Matthew's knuckles whitened around the steering wheel. The last of his savings had gone into this journey. They couldn't afford a breakdown now. Small shops lined Mapleton's main street, a hardware store, a diner, a bookstore with faded spines displayed in the window. Matthew slowed as Scout suddenly sat upright, ears pivoting forward. The dog's gaze fixed intently on a rustic cafe with a hand-painted sign, Homestead Cherry House. Beneath it, a weathered wooden plaque read, Caldwell Cherry Works 1919. Scout whined, a sound Matthew had learned to trust more than his own instincts. He pulled into an empty spot along the curb, the truck's engine shuddering to silence with worrying finality. Emma stirred, rubbing sleep from eyes that held more wisdom than any child should need. She peered through the window at the quaint building, its porch adorned with hanging baskets of geraniums. "Is this it, Dad? The place where we start over?" Matthew's heart constricted. He'd promised her stability after the divorce, after watching her childhood home emptied and sold, after saying goodbye to friends and school. He'd promised her roots after being uprooted. "I hope so, sweetheart. Remember what I always tell you. We'll find our real home someday." Emma nodded solemnly, a child carrying adult burdens. He'd never been able to shield her from life's harsher realities, but he'd made sure she knew she was loved unconditionally, something his military deployments and her mother's ambivalence had often complicated. The cafe door creaked as they entered, Scout leading the way with cautious steps. The interior smelled of cherry wood and coffee beans, walls lined with faded photographs of sprawling orchards and smiling workers from another era. Behind an antique counter stood Walter Caldwell, 78 years old, but standing straight, despite the years etched into his face. His trim silver beard and sharp blue eyes gave him a distinguished appearance, and at odds with his worn wool sweater and frayed green scarf. Walter struggled with an ancient espresso machine, muttering under his breath as steam hissed erratically from its valves. Scout suddenly barked, three short, evenly spaced sounds that Matthew recognized as the dog's warning pattern. Matthew's trained ear caught it, then the distinctive metallic whine of pressure building past safe thresholds. Military instinct took over as he moved toward the counter with purpose. That machine's about to blow. The pressure valve's failing. Walter looked up, startled, as Matthew reached over and quickly twisted the release gauge. Steam erupted in a controlled burst rather than a destructive explosion. The sound filled the cafe, dissipating along with immediate danger. Walter's weathered face registered shock, then calculated assessment. His gaze drifted to the faded Cherry Hill Engineer Battalion patch on Matthew's jacket, the unit known for handling everything from bridge construction to bomb disposal. Not many would hear that sound and know exactly what to do. Military engineer, 15 years. Deployed to Afghanistan. Iraq, 2 tours each. Walter nodded with the respect of someone who understood service. "I served too. Korea. Different war, same lessons." Emma had wandered to a wall of photographs drawn to images of vast cherry orchards stretching across rolling hills, trees heavy with bright fruit, and smiling workers filling wooden crates. "Is this your farm? It looks magical." Walter's expression softened as he approached her, pride warming his voice. "That's Caldwell Cherry Works, about 6 miles north of town. Used to be the largest cherry orchard in the state. My family built it from nothing in 1919. Those photographs show how it looked in its prime. Used to be." Matthew noticed the past tense, recognizing the familiar cadence of loss. Walter's smile faded. "Meridian Lake Cooperative diverted our water source 10 years ago for regional development. Called it progress. The soil dried up, the trees started dying. Now I've just got this cafe and memories of what was. Scout had finished inspecting the cafe and returned to Matthew's side, but his ears remained alert, occasionally twitching toward the wooden floorboards near the counter. Something beneath the floor held the dog's attention. Emma, with a child's directness, looked up at Walter. "That's so sad. Can't you fix the water?" Before Walter could answer, the bell above the door chimed. A man in his 60s entered, exuding authority without effort. His tailored suit and gold watch spoke of wealth, while his calculating gaze suggested someone accustomed to getting his way. His silver hair was perfectly coiffed, his smile practiced but cold. "Walter, are you boring these travelers with ancient history again?" Victor Harrington, president of Mapleton National Bank and town council chairman. Emma instinctively moved closer to Matthew. Scout positioned himself between them and the newcomer, not growling but watchful. Walter's posture stiffened. They were asking about the farm, Victor. Some people still care about this town's heritage. Victor's laugh lacked warmth. "Heritage doesn't pay bills, Walter. Speaking of which, your property tax deadline approaches. The council's development plan for that land would benefit everyone, not just stubborn, old farmers clinging to the past." His gaze shifted to Matthew, assessing the worn jacket, the calloused hands, the protective stance near his daughter. "And who might you be, Matthew Hayes? Just passing through." Victor glanced at the luggage visible through the cafe window. "Passing through with everything you own." He turned to Walter, voice dripping with mock concern. "You're not hiring this drifter for that dying farm, are you? Waste of money on a lost cause." Walter's eyes narrowed. "My money to waste, Victor." An uncomfortable silence stretched until Scout suddenly barked again, three distinct sounds, ears directed toward the floor. Matthew heard it then, a faint, rhythmic, metallic tapping from beneath the floorboards. The sound held an unnatural pattern, almost deliberate, like Morse code without the translation key. Matthew knelt, placing a hand against the wood. Vibrations pulsed against his palm, in a sequence too precise for settling foundations or water pipes. "What's underneath here?" Walter hesitated, something like fear flickering across his face. "Just the old cherry press room. Been closed up for decades." Victor's interest sharpened. Hearing things again, Walter buckled. Like Catherine used to. His tone carried mockery, but his eyes betrayed something else, calculation, perhaps concern. Walter turned away abruptly, busying himself with cups. "I need to close up early today, getting those headaches again." Victor checked his gold watch with exaggerated movement. "I should get back to people with real business anyway." He paused at the door, gaze lingering on Matthew. "Word of advice, stranger Mapleton has enough troubles without adding more. Some places aren't meant for fresh starts." The door closed behind him with finality. Walter's shoulders sagged as tension visibly drained from him. "He's right about one thing. That farm's a money pit now. I've let go all the workers except my caretaker, and he's retiring next month. Been trying to keep it alive myself, but at my age." Emma, who had been quietly listening, spoke up with unexpected confidence. "My dad can fix anything. He built bridges in the army that could hold tanks." Walter studied Matthew with newfound interest. "You any good with irrigation systems?" Matthew nodded cautiously, professional assessment replacing weariness. "I specialize in water management in drought zones, designed filtration and distribution systems for forward operating bases." Walter seemed to make a decision, eyes brightening with purpose for the first time. "I have a proposition. I need a farm manager, someone who understands mechanical systems and isn't afraid of hard work. The position comes with the caretaker's house. Nothing fancy, but solid walls, running water, 2 bedrooms." Matthew's breath caught. After months of temporary housing and rejected job applications, the offer seemed too fortuitous. "Why would you trust a stranger?" Walter gestured to the rescued espresso machine. "You just saved me a $5,000 replacement. More importantly, you heard something wrong when nobody else would have noticed. That's a rare quality, son." Scout barked, once tail wagging slightly. Walter laughed. "Your dog approves at least." Emma tugged at Matthew's sleeve, hope illuminating her face. "Can we see the house, Dad?" Please. 20 minutes later, Matthew steered his truck up a gravel drive lined with cherry trees, some healthy, many withered. The Caldwell farm spread across rolling hills, its once majestic orchards now patchy with neglect. An old processing facility stood at the property's center, its red paint peeling but its structure sound. Nearby, a two-story farmhouse with white clapboard siding housed Walter, while the smaller caretaker's cottage sat 50 yards away. The cottage needed work. Shutters hanging askew, porch steps, sagging garden overrun, but Matthew saw good bones beneath the disrepair. More importantly, he saw opportunity. His military pension barely covered essentials. Finding work had proved nearly impossible with employment gaps from deployments in his recent spiral after the divorce. Walter led them inside, apologizing for dust and emptiness. Previous caretaker took most furniture when he left. "I can loan you some basics to start." Emma wandered from room to room, her initial disappointment at the cottage's condition transforming into excitement as she claimed the smaller bedroom. "Dad, this window looks right at the cherry trees. It's like the farm stories you used to tell me." The hopeful gleam in his daughter's eyes made Matthew's decision. "We'll take it. When can we start?" Walter's relief was palpable. Tomorrow soon enough. That evening, after retrieving their meager belongings from the truck, Matthew helped Emma set up her bedroom with an air mattress and sleeping bag. Walter had brought over a card table, two folding chairs, and dishes from the cafe. The simple kindness nearly broke something in Matthew that he'd been holding together through sheer will. When Emma finally fell asleep exhausted from excitement and change, Matthew sat on the porch steps, Scout vigilant beside him. The night air carried the scent of earth and distant water, punctuated by the rustle of leaves and occasional owl calls. For the first time in months, he allowed himself to hope. Morning brought renewed purpose. Walter arrived early, carrying tools and a hand-drawn map of the irrigation system. The original was designed by a remarkable woman, Catherine Hayes. Brilliant engineer when women weren't supposed to be engineers. She developed a unique water management system that made our cherries the sweetest in Michigan. Matthew startled at the familiar surname. "Hayes, any relation to you?" Walter shook his head, a shadow crossing his features. "No relation I know of. Catherine was special. She disappeared in 1957, the night before our wedding. Sheriff said she ran off, but I never believed it. Something happened to her." The pain in Walter's voice sounded fresh despite 6 decades. Matthew didn't press further, instead focusing on the irrigation plans. These designs are incredibly sophisticated for the 1950s. She incorporated the natural limestone formations as filtration channels. Walter nodded with pride. Catherine said the land had a pulse rhythms most people were too busy to notice. Folks thought she was eccentric. I thought she was a genius. While Matthew studied the blueprints, Emma explored the cottage with Scout. Her delighted shriek brought both men running. They found her in the kitchen, pointing to a floorboard she'd discovered was loose. Scout pawed at the edge, ears forward with interest. "Look what Scout found." "There's something underneath." Matthew knelt, lifting the weathered board. In the small cavity beneath lay a metal box, tarnished with age but intact. He carefully extracted it, sensing Walter's growing tension. Inside, protected by watertight seals, lay a leather-bound journal and rolled technical drawings labeled Hayes Hydrodynamic Filtration System 1957. The handwriting was precise, elegant, and engineer's clarity combined with artistic flourish. The journal's cover bore the initials KH. Walter's hands trembled as he reached for the journal. Catherine's handwriting. I'd know it anywhere. Matthew unrolled the drawings carefully. Complex schematics detailed an ingenious system that utilized natural limestone veins beneath the farm as mineral filters, enriching the water with specific trace elements that would nourish cherry trees uniquely. The design showed remarkable understanding of hydrogeology, decades ahead of contemporary knowledge. The journal entries began as technical observations, but gradually revealed Catherine's growing concern. The final entry, dated 1 day before her disappearance, contained an urgent warning. "I've discovered something beneath the farm that changes everything. The limestone formations don't just filter, they contain rare earth minerals essential for electronics manufacturing. Worth millions now, billions someday. Someone knows. I've seen them surveying at night. They've offered to buy the farm from Walter at a fraction of its true value. When he refused, they threatened. Tomorrow I'll show Walter the evidence. If anything happens to me, the truth is hidden where water meets earth." Walter sank into a chair, face ashen. She was trying to protect the farm to protect me. And all these years I thought. Emma, sensing the gravity of their discovery, touched Walter's hand. "You didn't know. She couldn't tell you." Matthew studied the final pages, which included coordinates and references to underground water sources. This explains why Meridian Lake was so determined to control the water rights. It wasn't just about developing real estate, they wanted what's underneath. Walter's expression hardened with realization. Victor's father founded that company right after Catherine vanished. I never made the connection. Emma, who had been examining the box, found something else, a small photograph tucked into a hidden compartment. The faded image showed Catherine Hayes, a striking woman with intelligent eyes and determined expression, standing proudly beside a complex piece of equipment. On the back was written, "First successful test of the Hayes filtration system. The water remembers." Walter took the photograph with reverence, fingers tracing Catherine's image. She was right here all this time, trying to tell us something. Scout suddenly tensed, growling low in his throat. Matthew moved instinctively to the window, staying hidden while scanning the property. A black sedan was parked at the far end of the drive, too distant to identify occupants. After a moment, it pulled away, gravel crunching under its tires. Walter joined him at the window. "Victor's car. He must have seen you move in and gotten curious or concerned," Matthew thought. "We need to secure these documents somewhere safe. If Catherine was right, they're evidence of something bigger than water rights." The next morning, Matthew began systematic exploration of the farm's water system. Starting with Catherine's schematics, he traced the main pipeline that once fed the irrigation network. The physical evidence confirmed his suspicions. The system hadn't merely deteriorated, it had been deliberately sabotaged. Precise cuts at junction points, removed pressure valves, concrete poured into filtration chambers. Someone knew exactly how this system worked and exactly how to disable it, Matthew explained to Walter as they examined a severed main line. This wasn't vandalism, it was strategic. Walter's weathered face hardened. Meridian Lake claimed natural erosion damaged the system beyond repair. That's how they justified rerouting the water source away from our land. Matthew found himself increasingly impressed with Catherine's engineering. The system was decades ahead of its time, incorporating natural filtration, gravitational flow principles, and mineral enrichment that would be considered cutting edge even now. With his military engineering background, he understood enough to see her genius, but parts of the design still mystified him. Emma, meanwhile, had appointed herself Walter's assistant at the cafe each morning. The older man had clearly fallen for her inquisitive nature and determination to learn everything about the farm's history. She returned each afternoon with town gossip and cherry muffins, happily reporting on her new friends at the local school where Walter had helped enroll her. "The locals say, Mr. Harrington's family owns half the town, Dad. My friend Lily says her mom lost their farm to his bank last year." Matthew nodded, unsurprised. In every small town he'd known, power concentrated in predictable places. The bank, the largest employer, old money. He'd seen enough combat zones to recognize different forms of territory control. Late afternoon found him in the old processing facility comparing Catherine's designs to the current state of the machinery. Decades of disuse had left equipment seized with rust, but the core components seemed salvageable. A small movement caught his eye. Scout had discovered another loose floorboard near the main press, pawing at it with focused intent. The hidden compartment revealed a second journal, this one containing soil and water analysis from various points around the property. Catherine had methodically mapped mineral concentrations with particular attention to what she called anomaly zones near the creek bed. Her notes detailed unusual electrical conductivity in the groundwater at specific locations, properties consistent with rare earth elements. A truck engine rumbled up the drive. Matthew slipped the journal into his jacket pocket before stepping outside to find a sleek black Range Rover parked beside his weathered pickup. A man in his mid-40s emerged, tall, polished, with the same cold confidence as Victor Harrington, but a younger, more predatory version. Alexander Harrington, Victor's son and VP of Development for Meridian Lake Cooperative. His custom suit and Italian leather shoes looked absurdly out of place among the dusty farm buildings. "So you're Walter's new project?" Alexander observed with practiced charm that didn't reach his eyes. Bold career move, taking on a historical restoration. Matthew recognized the calculated assessment he'd seen it in officers evaluating expendable assets. Just helping a good man preserve something important. Alexander surveyed the decaying buildings and struggling orchards with theatrical skepticism. "Admirable sentiment, but financially unsound. Our company has offered Mr. Caldwell generous terms for this property multiple times. He could retire comfortably instead of pouring money into this sentimental attachment. I believe Mr. Caldwell can make his own decisions. Alexander's smile thinned. Of course. I just hate seeing resources wasted. Our development plan would revitalize this entire Valley luxury homes, golf course, boutique shopping. Progress benefits everyone. Scout positioned himself between Matthew and Alexander, not growling, but watchful hackles, slightly raised. Alexander eyed the dog with barely concealed discomfort. Meridian Lake is prepared to increase our offer by 15% as a gesture of goodwill. Please convey that to Walter. Matthew's expression remained neutral. I'll pass that along. Alexander turned to leave, then paused. Friendly advice: I wouldn't dig too deeply into this property's past. Sometimes history should remain buried. His gaze drifted toward the processing facility, lingering on the windows, where the hidden compartment lay. After the Range Rover disappeared down the drive, Matthew released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Scout relaxed slightly but continued staring after the vehicle. That evening, Matthew took the journals to town, seeking out the local library. The modest brick building housed historical records for the county and hopefully someone who could help decode Catherine's more cryptic references. He found both in Rebecca Morgan, the 38-year-old head librarian whose intelligence radiated through piercing hazel eyes behind vintage glasses. Rebecca's initial professional courtesy transformed to genuine interest when Matthew explained his connection to the Caldwell farm and showed her Catherine's journals. Her fingers traced the engineer's handwriting with scholarly reverence. This is extraordinary primary source material. Catherine Hayes was practically erased from local records. I've found only passing mentions of her in newspaper archives. Rebecca led Matthew to a small research room, quickly retrieving land records, old newspapers, and county maps. Her efficiency suggested someone accustomed to piecing together historical puzzles. As they worked, she explained her own background geology degree before finding her calling as a librarian specializing in local history. Their search revealed a disturbing pattern. Harrington Minerals, the company that preceded Meridian Lake Cooperative, had systematically acquired properties throughout the valley in the 1950s, particularly those along the watershed. A business filing showed the company's incorporation date one day after Catherine Hayes disappeared. Most telling was a canceled land transaction between Walter's father and Harrington Minerals dated the week before Catherine vanished. The contract had been invalidated with a handwritten note. Geological survey findings negate previous valuation assumptions. Rebecca frowned, studying the signature. This looks like Catherine's handwriting from the journals. She must have conducted her own survey and proven the land was worth far more than Harrington was offering. Their most shocking discovery came in a dusty death records volume. Catherine Hayes declared deceased October 17, 1957. Cause: accidental drowning while inspecting water pump equipment. No body recovered. Matthew's stomach tightened. She didn't run away. They made her disappear. Rebecca nodded grimly, and then they started dismantling her work piece by piece. One final discovery upended everything Matthew thought he knew. In researching Catherine's background, Rebecca uncovered a family tree showing that Catherine's younger brother was William Hayes, Matthew's grandfather. "You're Catherine's great-nephew," Rebecca whispered, eyes wide. This can't be coincidence. Matthew's mind reeled. His grandfather had rarely spoken of his past, mentioning only that he'd left Michigan after a family tragedy. The pieces were aligning with devastating clarity. Catherine was his blood relative, and he'd unknowingly returned to complete her work 60 years later. Scout, who had been resting quietly in the corner of the research room, suddenly raised his head, ears pivoting toward the library entrance. A low growl rumbled in his chest. Through the glass partition, Matthew spotted Victor Harrington speaking with another librarian, occasionally glancing toward the research room. Rebecca quickly gathered the materials. "Use the back door. Take these copies. I'll secure the originals in our historical archive vault." When Matthew returned to the farm, Emma was sitting with Walter on the porch enjoying hot chocolate despite the mild evening. Her face lit up when she saw him. "Dad, Mr. Walter's been telling me about the cherry harvest festival they used to have. Can we bring it back when you fix the farm?" Walter chuckled, but the hope in his eyes was unmistakable. "If anyone can restore this place, it's your father. Military engineers don't quit easily." Matthew hesitated before sharing his discoveries, mindful of Emma's presence. But his daughter's perception surprised him. "You found out something about Ms. Catherine, didn't you?" Emma asked. "Something important." Walter straightened, suddenly alert. "Catherine, what about her?" Matthew sat beside them, weighing his words carefully. "I think she may have been my great-aunt." My grandfather was William Hayes. Walter's mug slipped from his fingers, shattering on the porch boards. Catherine's brother, he whispered. She talked about him often. They were close until he moved west after college. It gets more complicated, Matthew continued. Catherine didn't run away before your wedding. Evidence suggests she discovered valuable minerals beneath the farm minerals the Harringtons wanted. When she refused to let them take advantage of you, she was silenced. Walter's face crumpled, decades of uncertainty collapsing into grief. I knew she wouldn't leave without explanation. I knew it. Emma moved to Walter's side, her small hand covering his gnarled one. She was trying to protect you and the farm. Like Dad protects me. Walter composed himself with visible effort. If what you're saying is true, the Harringtons have known who you are from the moment you arrived. They've been watching the Hayes family for generations to protect their secret. Scout growled in agreement, ears alert, and focused on the darkening orchard beyond the porch. Matthew followed his gaze, but saw only shadows among the trees. Still, he trusted the dog's instincts enough to move Emma inside. Late that night after Emma was asleep, Matthew sat with Walter at the kitchen table, blueprints spread before them under a single lamp. Rain had begun falling, gentle at first, but intensifying to a steady drumming on the roof. Walter pointed to a section of Catherine's design. This creek bed was always the heart of her system. She called it the convergence, where groundwater met surface runoff. Said the water carried memory through the limestone. Matthew nodded, connecting this to the photograph inscription. The old processing facility sits right above this junction point. If I can restore this section, we might get enough water flowing to save at least part of the orchard. A sudden crack of thunder startled them both. Walter glanced nervously at the windows where rain now lashed against glass. Bad storms always remind me of the night Catherine disappeared. Weather just like this. Before Matthew could respond, Scout erupted into urgent barking at the back door. The distinct three-bark pattern that signaled danger. Matthew switched off the lamp and moved cautiously to the window. Lightning illuminated the yard in strobing flashes, revealing a disturbing scene. The processing facility door stood open, swinging in the wind. Stay here, Matthew instructed Walter. Call Rebecca. Tell her to bring the sheriff if I'm not back in 15 minutes. The rain soaked Matthew instantly as he crossed the yard, Scout leading with focused determination. They entered the processing facility silently, Matthew wishing for his military sidearm. Lightning flashes through grimy windows provided the only illumination, casting monstrous shadows across rusting equipment. Scout froze, ears forward, staring toward the main press where they discovered the hidden compartment. Matthew detected movement. Someone was methodically searching the floorboards, prying them up one by one with a crowbar. The intruder's flashlight beam swept across the floor, reflecting off rainwater, beginning to puddle through the leaking roof. Lightning revealed a tall figure in dark rainwear, the distinctive shape of Alexander Harrington, unmistakable despite the poor visibility. Matthew stepped forward deliberately, letting his boots sound against the wooden floor. Looking for something, Mr. Harrington. Alexander spun flashlight beam, blinding Matthew momentarily. When his vision cleared, he found himself staring down the barrel of a handgun. Hayes. I should have known Walter would enlist family help eventually. Matthew raised his hand slowly, calculating distances and angles. I imagine the Harrington family has been watching for Hayes' relatives for decades. Alexander's laugh held no humor. Grandfather was quite thorough about tracking potential complications. Your grandfather was smart enough to disappear to California. Shame you didn't inherit his sense of self-preservation. Matthew took a measured step forward, keeping his voice even. Catherine discovered your family's real interest in this land, the rare earth minerals. Alexander's expression revealed nothing, but his gun hand remained steady. Ancient history, though it's almost poetic, another Hayes returning to create problems, another generation of Harrington solving them. Scout growled, a deep rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. Alexander's attention flickered to the dog, momentarily the opening Matthew needed. He lunged forward, deflecting the gun with a practiced move from combat training. The weapon discharged the bullet, splintering a support beam as both men crashed into the ancient cherry press. Years of rust gave way under their combined weight metal, shrieking as they tumbled through rotting floorboards into darkness below. Matthew landed hard, pain exploding through his shoulder. Water rushed somewhere nearby, the sound amplified in confined space. He'd fallen into some kind of underground chamber, Catherine's pumping station, he realized. Scout barked frantically from above, unable to follow. Lightning illuminated the chamber through the broken floor, revealing rusted pipes, gauges, and a control panel that must have been state-of-the-art in 1957. Alexander lay nearby, dazed but conscious, blood trickling from a gash on his forehead. His gun had disappeared in the fall. Matthew's military training took over, prioritizing immediate threats and escape routes. The chamber was filling with water, not from the rain, but from a breach in one of the main pipes. The fall had damaged Catherine's system, further releasing groundwater that had been redirected decades ago. A familiar metallic tapping reached his ears, the same rhythmic sound they had heard beneath the cafe floor. Here, unmistakably, it came from water striking the ancient pipes in a pattern that couldn't be random. Catherine had built something more than a filtration system, something responsive to pressure changes, almost like a natural computing mechanism. Alexander struggled to his feet, swaying as water rose past their ankles. Blood loss and possible concussion had transformed his arrogance to confusion and fear. "Hayes, get us out of here!" Matthew spotted a rusted ladder leading to a hatch in the chamber's ceiling, an access point separate from the hole they'd fallen through. Decades of disuse had left the rungs questionable, but it offered their only escape as water continued rising. The mechanism for releasing the hatch appeared jammed, corroded shut after years underground. Matthew strained against its shoulder, screaming in protest, metal cutting into his palms. Alexander's voice held growing panic. "My father knows I'm here. If anything happens to me, threatening me while I'm trying to save your life isn't your best move." Matthew grunted, applying leverage techniques he'd learned for emergency evacuations. The mechanism groaned but refused to budge. Above Scout's barking, changed pattern, someone else had arrived. Walter's voice called down, fearful but determined. "Matthew, are you down there? The sheriff's on his way." The water reached their waist, now bitingly cold and rising faster. Matthew positioned himself beneath the hatch, bracing his legs against the wall for maximum force. With a final surge of desperate strength, he drove upward. The mechanism shrieked, then gave way with an explosive release. The hatch swung open to reveal Walter and Rebecca peering down, faces pale in the flashlight beam. "Rope," Matthew shouted. "And hurry, this chamber's flooding." Rebecca disappeared, briefly returning with rope from Walter's truck. Matthew secured it around Alexander. First, the man's head injury made climbing impossible without assistance. As they hauled the semi-conscious Harrington up, Matthew made a final scan of the chamber, knowing he might never access it again. A metal cabinet previously hidden behind equipment had been exposed by the rising water. One door hung open, revealing a waterproof case wedged inside. Matthew waded toward it, fighting the current now forming as water found new channels. He grabbed the case seconds before the cabinet tipped over, disappearing beneath the churning surface. The rope descended again. Matthew secured the case to his belt, then began his ascent, muscles burning with effort. As he reached the top, multiple hands pulled him to safety. He collapsed onto the processing facility floor, gasping for breath as Scout frantically licked his face. Sheriff's deputies arrived moments later, lights painting the walls with rotating red and blue. Alexander Harrington sat slumped against a wall, a deputy administering first aid to his head wound. Another officer approached Matthew with questioning authority. "Want to explain why you and the VP of Meridian Lake ended up in a hole in the ground?" Rebecca stepped forward, professional composure masking her earlier fear. Mr. Harrington broke in. "We have security footage from the library's exterior cameras showing him following Matthew earlier today. When Walter called about an intruder, I came immediately and witnessed Mr. Harrington threatening Matthew with a firearm." The deputy's expression remained neutral, but Matthew detected skepticism. He knew how this looked, drifter accusing prominent local businessman of criminal activity. The scales of small-town justice rarely balanced equally. Then Alexander spoke, his voice weak but clear. "Hayes is telling the truth. I was here looking for something. My father sent me." The admission shocked everyone into silence. Alexander's normally calculated demeanor had cracked, perhaps from the head injury, perhaps from nearly drowning. "I'm done protecting family secrets that aren't even profitable anymore. We knew about the minerals, we diverted the water, and yes, my grandfather dealt with Catherine Hayes." A deputy recorded Alexander's statement while paramedics prepared him for transport. Before they loaded him into the ambulance, he fixed Matthew with an unsettling stare. "My father won't stop. This land has been Harrington obsession for 3 generations." After the authorities departed, promising further investigation, Matthew finally examined the waterproof case he'd rescued. The metal box opened with surprising ease, revealing contents preserved in vacuum-sealed protection. Inside lay more journals, a small tape recorder from the 1950s, and a sealed envelope addressed simply, "To Walter if I don't return." Walter's hands trembled as he took the envelope, staring at Catherine's handwriting with reverent disbelief. "For 60 years I've wondered what really happened. Now I'm not sure I want to know." Matthew understood the feeling. Some truths were too painful, too late to change anything. But Emma, who had awakened during the commotion and refused to be sent back to bed, touched Walter's arm with gentle wisdom. "Miss Catherine wanted you to know. That's why she left this for you. She didn't leave you. She was trying to come back." Walter nodded, tears mingling with rainwater on his weathered face. He carefully opened the envelope to find a single sheet of paper and a small photograph. The letter, written in Catherine's precise hand, contained only a few lines. "My dearest Walter, if you are reading this, something has happened to me. The Harringtons discovered what lies beneath our farm minerals that will someday be worth millions. I confronted them with evidence of their deception, and now I fear for my safety. I've hidden the proof where water meets earth. Remember how I taught you to listen to the water. It will lead you home. All my love, Catherine." The photograph showed Catherine standing beside the creek that ran through the property, smiling despite serious eyes. On the back coordinates, in a simple note, "The heart of the convergence." Dawn broke over the Caldwell farm, painting the damaged cherry trees with golden light that belied the night's chaos. Matthew stood on the porch watching Emma help Walter prepare breakfast in the kitchen. The old man moved with renewed purpose, something vital rekindled by Catherine's message. Scout sat alert beside Matthew, ears occasionally twitching toward the orchard where the morning breeze carried the faint sound of rushing water. The storm had triggered something in the underground system. Pipes sealed for decades had reopened channels, redirected the first tentative pulse of renewal, reaching parched soil. Matthew unfolded Catherine's schematics, studying the detailed rendering of what she called the convergence, the heart of her system, where underground streams met, carrying minerals through limestone filters. According to her calculations, this junction point created the perfect balance of nutrients that made Caldwell cherries uniquely flavorful and the trees exceptionally hardy. The coordinates from Catherine's photograph marked this exact location and apparently concealed evidence against the Harringtons. But more importantly, it might hold the key to fully restoring the water system. Walter joined him on the porch, looking years younger despite exhaustion. "There's something I never told you. The tapping sound you heard at the cafe beneath the floorboards, I've heard it for 60 years. Always the same pattern, always when I'm alone. I used to think it was Catherine somehow trying to reach me." Matthew considered the precision of the sound, the deliberate rhythm. Not a ghost, though the notion held poetic appeal. More likely, Catherine had designed a monitoring system with auditory alerts. When pressure changed or water quality shifted, the pipes would create specific vibration patterns. Emma emerged from the kitchen carrying mismatched plates of eggs and toast. As she distributed breakfast, her face glowed with excitement. "Dad, I figured something out. The picture of Ms. Catherine by the creek. I know where it is. I found that big rock yesterday when Scout and I were exploring." Matthew examined the photograph again. Sure enough, a distinctive limestone formation appeared in the background, unique enough to locate if it still existed. Emma's discovery ignited immediate action. After breakfast, she led them along the creek bed, Scout ranging ahead with purpose. The storm had swelled the waterway, normally a trickle, into a respectable stream. They followed it upstream to where the creek emerged from a culvert beneath the main orchard. There, Emma pointed triumphantly to a weathered limestone outcropping that matched the photograph perfectly. 60 years had added moss and erosion, but the formation remained unmistakable. Walter stood transfixed, overwhelmed by standing in the exact spot where Catherine had stood decades earlier. This was her favorite place on the farm. She'd sit here for hours just listening to the water. Scout circled the area nose to ground before stopping at a particular spot where the creek bank had partially collapsed from the storm. He began digging with focused determination, soil giving way easily after the rain. A metal edge appeared beneath his paws. Matthew knelt to help, carefully extracting what proved to be another waterproof container, military grade, similar to those his unit had used for sensitive equipment. The case was secured with a combination lock. Walter stared at it, mind racing. What would Catherine have used for the combination? Emma, applying a child's direct logic, suggested the obvious. "Your wedding date." When you were supposed to get married? Walter turned the dials with trembling fingers. 10 to 17:57. The lock released with a soft click. Inside lay documented evidence of the Harrington family's crimes, photographs of Alexander's grandfather trespassing on Caldwell land, surveying reports they'd falsified, and most damning, a recorded conversation where he explicitly threatened Catherine. Accompanying these were Catherine's comprehensive geological surveys proving the presence of rare earth minerals throughout the valley, with the highest concentration directly beneath the Caldwell farm. Most astonishing was a detailed letter outlining the true nature of her water system. Catherine hadn't merely created an irrigation network, she had designed a sustainable method for extracting trace amounts of valuable minerals through water filtration without damaging the land. The process would take decades rather than years, preserving both farm and resources for generations. The Harringtons' destructive mining approach would have depleted the land in a decade, leaving nothing but toxic runoff and dead soil. Catherine Hayes hadn't just been ahead of her time, she'd conceived a methodology that even now would be considered revolutionary green technology. The final item in the case was a small journal with a single entry dated the day Catherine disappeared. They came for me tonight, Victor Sr. and his men. I escaped through the maintenance tunnel, but was injured in the struggle. I'm hiding in the cave system near the convergence. If I don't survive, I pray someday someone will find this and understand what I tried to protect. Not just the minerals or the farm, but the principle that land shouldn't be exploited, it should be partnered with. The water remembers. It always finds its way home. The journal slipped from Walter's hands as 60 years of uncertainty collapsed into devastating truth. Matthew caught him as his knees buckled, easing the older man onto a nearby rock. Emma gathered the fallen pages with solemn care, understanding even at her young age the weight of the moment. Catherine's final message had answered decades of questions, but had also opened the door to justice long delayed. The evidence provided clear motive for the Harrington family's obsession with acquiring the Caldwell farm and suppressing Catherine's innovations. More disturbingly, it suggested Victor Harrington Sr. had direct involvement in Catherine's disappearance and presumed death. "We need to get this to the sheriff," Matthew said quietly, securing the evidence in the waterproof case. Walter nodded, new resolve hardening his expression. "And then we're going to finish what Catherine started. We're going to bring water back to this land." As they walked back toward the cottage, Scout suddenly stopped, ears pivoting toward the creek. The dog's posture shifted from alert to almost reverent, head tilted, as though listening to a frequency beyond human perception. Matthew and Walter exchanged glances, both thinking of Catherine's belief that water carried memory. Behind them, the creek seemed to surge momentarily, its gentle babble transforming briefly into the same rhythmic tapping they'd heard beneath the cafe floor. Emma, with a child's acceptance of the inexplicable, smiled. "She's still helping us." That afternoon, storm clouds gathered again over Mapleton. Matthew stood in the sheriff's office, evidence spread across the desk. The sheriff, a career law enforcement officer named Jackson, with more integrity than political ambition, reviewed Catherine's documentation with growing concern. "This goes beyond trespassing and harassment, Mr. Hayes. These materials suggest potential involvement in a historical homicide." Rebecca, who had joined them to provide historical context, pointed to the timeline she'd assembled. The Harrington family's wealth expanded dramatically after 1957, coinciding with new technologies requiring the exact minerals Catherine documented beneath the Caldwell farm. Sheriff Jackson sighed, the weight of small-town politics evident in his expression. "Victor Harrington practically owns this county. His family has funded every sheriff's campaign for 3 generations, mine included." Matthew tensed, preparing for institutional resistance, but Jackson continued, surprising him. "Which is why I'm calling in the state investigators. This is bigger than Mapleton politics." As they left the sheriff's office, Rebecca touched Matthew's arm gently. "You've started something that can't be stopped now. The Harringtons won't take this lightly." Matthew watched a black sedan cruise slowly past the sheriff's office, Victor Harrington clearly visible in the passenger seat. "I'm counting on that. Some battles need to be fought in the open." Thunder rumbled in the distance as Matthew returned to the farm. Emma was helping Walter in the cafe, leaving Matthew alone to begin the practical work of restoring Catherine's system. He started at the convergence point where the previous night's storm had already initiated natural clearing of blocked channels. The first step would be documenting the current state of the system, mapping what remained functional, what needed repair, and what had been deliberately sabotaged. Matthew photographed and measured, creating a detailed assessment that could guide reconstruction efforts. As rain began falling again, he took shelter in the processing facility, examining the hole they'd fallen through the previous night. Daylight revealed the flooded chamber more clearly, Catherine's control station for the entire water system. If he could drain and restore it, they might accelerate recovery of the farm significantly. The building's door swung open violently, propelled by wind and something more deliberate. Victor Harrington stood framed in the doorway, rain plastering his expensive suit to his frame face contorted with barely controlled fury. You think you've won something here? You're nothing but Walter's latest charity project. A broken soldier playing farmer. Matthew straightened slowly, keeping his voice level despite adrenaline flooding his system. The sheriff has the evidence, Victor. This isn't just about water rights anymore. Victor stepped closer, abandoning pretense of civility. My son may have lost his nerve, but I haven't survived 60 years of protecting this valley to be undone by another Hayes stepping into business they don't understand. The implication hung heavy between them, Victor's direct knowledge of what happened to Catherine. Matthew fought to control his rising anger, keeping his voice steady. Catherine designed a sustainable system that could have benefited everyone. Your family chose destruction for quick profit instead. Victor laughed bitterly. Sustainability doesn't build empires, boy. Catherine was naive, just like Walter, just like you. A crash of thunder punctuated his words as rain intensified, drumming against the metal roof. Victor moved with surprising speed for his age, producing a revolver from beneath his jacket. Sheriff Jackson might be having second thoughts about his career right now. Unfortunate timing with his retirement fund being managed by my bank. Matthew assessed options with combat-honed clarity. Distance to Victor 12 feet. Cover minimal. Weapon within Victor's effective range. Scout back at the cottage. I understand now why your family's been watching mine for generations, Matthew said, shifting his weight subtly to preparation stance. You're afraid of us. Victor's eyes narrowed. The Hayes family has been a persistent inconvenience. Catherine was too smart for her own good. Your grandfather was wise enough to flee. You lack survival instinct. A sound behind Victor made him turn slightly. Emma stood in the doorway, eyes wide with fear as she took in the scene. She must have come looking for her father when the storm worsened. Matthew's heart froze. Emma, run! Victor swung the gun toward the child with cold calculation. Emma stood paralyzed by fear, thunder masking Matthew's desperate warning. The next moments compressed into bullet-time clarity, Matthew launching himself forward as Victor's finger tightened on the trigger became the sickening certainty he wouldn't reach them in time. The flash of silver cream fur as Scout materialized from behind Emma, hurling his body toward Victor with military-trained precision. The gun discharged as Scout's weight crashed into Victor, the bullet splintering wood inches from Emma. Man and dog tumbled backward, Victor losing balance at the edge of the broken floor. He teetered for one suspended moment before plummeting into the flooded chamber below, Scout still entangled with him. Matthew reached Emma, pulling her away from the edge and into his arms, her small body trembling. Are you hurt? Are you okay, Scout? Emma cried, pointing toward the hole. He fell in with the bad man. Matthew peered down to see Scout swimming strongly in the rising water, circling Victor, who flailed with panicked strokes. The older man had struck his head in the fall blood, mixing with water as he struggled to stay afloat. Every military instinct told Matthew to prioritize civilian safety, get Emma out, call for help. But Scout's unwavering loyalty and Victor's potential knowledge about Catherine's fate forced an immediate decision. Stay by the door, Emma. Don't move. Matthew lowered himself into the chamber, using exposed pipes as handholds, dropping the final distance into chest-deep water. Scout immediately swam to him, confusion evident in the dog's expressive eyes. Protect Emma or help the drowning man? Matthew waded toward Victor, who was now barely keeping his head above water, coherence fading with blood loss and shock. Together, Matthew and Scout guided the semi-conscious man toward the ladder they'd used for escape the previous night. With tremendous effort, Matthew hoisted Victor's dead weight up the rungs, Scout swimming circles below, as if providing backup support. When they emerged into the processing facility, Emma had already run for help. Walter and Rebecca arrived moments later, followed by Sheriff Jackson and paramedics. As emergency personnel stabilized Victor for transport, the older man regained partial lucidity. He fixed Matthew with a gaze stripped of pretense, voice barely audible. She crawled out, through the caves. Made it at 3 days. Found her by the North Ridge. Too late. The confession emerged as a final unburdening, whether from conscience or concussion remained unclear. Sheriff Jackson documented the statement while paramedics loaded Victor into an ambulance. Catherine survived the initial attack, Matthew realized. She hid in the cave system, but couldn't overcome her injuries. Walter stood motionless, processing this final piece of a 60-year puzzle. She tried to come back to me. Emma, who had been quietly petting Scout's wet fur, looked up with the unfiltered wisdom of childhood. She did come back. She's the water. She's helping us fix everything now. The storm passed by, evening clouds parting to reveal a sunset that painted the damaged orchard in hues of promise. Matthew stood on the porch of the caretaker's cottage, Emma asleep inside after the day's trauma, Scout maintaining vigilant watch at her bedside. Rebecca joined him, bringing coffee and quiet solidarity. You could have let him drown. Matthew's military ethics provided clear guidance even when emotions suggested alternatives. That wouldn't have honored Catherine's memory. She designed systems to sustain life, not take it. Rebecca's hand found his warmth against the cooling evening air. You're a good man, Matthew Hayes, a worthy inheritor of Catherine's legacy. Walter approached from the main house carrying a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. The day's revelations had aged and renewed him simultaneously, grief finally finding direction after decades of uncertainty, purpose crystallizing through action rather than waiting. I found these in Catherine's old room. Never could bring myself to clear it out completely. He unwrapped the bundle to reveal faded blueprints, Catherine's original designs for expanding the water system beyond the Caldwell farm to neighboring properties, creating a sustainable network that would benefit the entire valley. She always thought bigger than the rest of us, Walter said, voice thick with emotion. Wasn't just about our farm. She wanted to transform the whole region. Matthew studied the plans with professional appreciation and personal reverence. The system was brilliantly conceived, utilizing natural water paths, minimizing disruption to the ecosystem, and distributing resources equitably across multiple properties. We can still make this happen, he said, possibility taking root where uncertainty had dominated hours earlier. Between Catherine's designs and my engineering background, we could restore not just the farm, but implement her vision for the valley. Rebecca nodded thoughtfully. The state environmental agency would support this, especially after the evidence against Meridian Lake comes to light. Green infrastructure grants could provide funding. Walter's weathered face transformed with the first genuine smile Matthew had seen since his arrival. Your great-aunt would have liked you, son. You have her determination. And her ability to hear what the rest of us miss. As darkness settled over the farm, the sound of water moving through long dormant pipes created a gentle symphony beneath their feet. Catherine's system awakened by the storm, and Matthew's initial repairs had begun the slow process of recovery. Through the open window came Emma's voice as she read aloud to Scout from her book of fairy tales, Childhood Resilience, Finding Equilibrium After Trauma. Matthew Hayes stood at the convergence of past and future personal history and professional purpose. He'd come to Mapleton at his lowest point, broke directionless, a father struggling to provide stability for his daughter. He'd found instead a legacy to reclaim a wrong to right and the beginnings of healing in unexpected places. Somewhere beneath the orchard, water coursed through channels designed by a brilliant woman whose voice had been silenced too soon. Her system, like truth itself, had found its way back to the surface after decades underground. The water remembered. It had always remembered. Tomorrow would bring investigators' statements, the beginning of justice for Catherine Hayes. It would bring hard work, repairing pipes, clearing channels, revitalizing soil long deprived of nourishment. It would bring challenges as the Harrington family's influence fought to maintain control. But tonight, in this moment between storm and revelation, Matthew allowed himself to believe in restoration of the farm of justice of himself. He'd come seeking temporary shelter and found permanent purpose. Emma had asked if this was where they would start over. Now he could answer with certainty. Yes, this is where we build our home. State investigators arrived at the Caldwell farm 3 days after Victor Harrington's arrest, their unmarked sedans kicking up dust along the gravel drive. Matthew watched them from the porch of the processing facility, where he had spent every daylight hour since the confrontation, mapping Catherine's water system with methodical precision. The lead investigator, a stern woman in her 50s with salt and pepper hair, pulled into a practical bun, approached with the measured stride of someone who had seen enough corruption to recognize its patterns without becoming jaded. I'm Special Agent Diana Chen, Environmental Crimes Division. You must be Matthew Hayes. The use of his full name and Catherine's surname didn't escape Matthew's notice. Word travels fast. Agent Chen surveyed the property with professional assessment, gaze lingering on the contrast between withered trees in the main orchard and the small section nearest the creek that had already begun showing signs of revival after just days of renewed water flow. 3 generations of environmental manipulation, 2 suspicious deaths, 1 family controlling an entire watershed. This case has my full attention, Mr. Hayes. Matthew led her through the evidence they'd gathered: Catherine's journals and designs, the restored pumping chamber soil samples, showing chemical signatures consistent with deliberate contamination. Agent Chen documented everything with clinical efficiency, occasionally consulting with a geologist who had accompanied the investigative team. The geologist, a bearded man with weathered hands that spoke of fieldwork rather than laboratories, examined the soil samples with growing amazement. These contamination patterns are consistent with strategic groundwater poisoning, not just to kill trees, but to devalue land systematically over decades. By mid-morning, the property teemed with activity. Environmental technicians collected samples from multiple locations, mapping contamination patterns. Another team documented the deliberate sabotage to Catherine's system, cataloging each cut pipe and blocked channel with forensic thoroughness. The investigation had expanded beyond Victor Harrington's attack to encompass 60 years of environmental crimes. Emma watched from the cottage window, Scout at her side. She had been uncharacteristically quiet since witnessing Victor's attack, processing trauma in the resilient but vulnerable way of children. Walter sat with her, the two finding comfort in shared witness. Rebecca arrived with lunch for everyone, earning grateful nods from the investigators who had been working straight through the morning. She pulled Matthew aside as agents swarmed the property. The state's environmental agency is sending specialists tomorrow. They're specifically interested in Catherine's sustainable extraction method. It could revolutionize mineral harvesting techniques, exactly what she hoped for. A bittersweet validation coming decades too late. She deserved to see this. Rebecca squeezed his arm gently. She is seeing it through you. Some legacies skip generations to find the right messenger. In the afternoon, Sheriff Jackson brought news that made the investigators exchange meaningful glances. Alexander Harrington had turned state's witness, providing detailed records of Meridian Lake's environmental violations in exchange for immunity. Victor, still hospitalized under guard, maintained stubborn silence about Catherine's fate beyond his brief confession during the rescue. Perhaps most significantly, 3 other farmers in the valley had come forward with similar stories. Water-diverted crops failing, mysteriously pressured to sell land at depreciated values. The Harrington family's strategy had affected the entire region, not just the Caldwell farm. By evening, when the investigators finally departed with promises to return, Matthew felt the weight of revelations settling into determination. He called Emma and Walter to the kitchen table where he had spread Catherine's original designs. Catherine didn't just create an irrigation system. She designed a water management network that could serve the entire valley sustainably. Walter nodded, recognition dawning. She talked about that expanding beyond our property. Said water shouldn't respect property lines any more than rain does. Matthew traced the elegant schematics with newfound purpose. We have a chance to implement her full vision. Not just restore this farm, but transform the valley the way she intended. Emma, quiet all day, finally spoke up. Would that make the bad men stop hurting people? The innocent question crystallized everything: environmental justice, personal vendetta, historical reckoning into its simplest moral clarity. Matthew knelt beside his daughter, finding in her eyes the same determination that had driven Catherine Hayes decades earlier. That's exactly what it would do, sweetheart. People who understand how to work with nature don't need to hurt others to succeed. The following morning brought news that shifted the dynamics yet again. Victor Harrington had suffered a stroke during the night, not life-threatening, but serious enough to leave his right side partially paralyzed and his speech impaired. The sheriff reported that doctors couldn't determine whether stress, guilt, or simple aging had triggered the event. Victor's remaining days would be spent with limited mobility in the constant presence of law enforcement, a prison of physical limitation rather than bars. Matthew found no satisfaction in the development, only a hollow recognition of justice's imperfect manifestations. While the legal process advanced, Matthew threw himself into Catherine's restoration project with single-minded focus. Using her designs and his military engineering training, he began systematic repair of the water system's core components. The most critical junction, what Catherine called the convergence, required careful excavation, where the storm had already begun natural clearing. He worked methodically from sunrise until evening. Darkness forced him to stop, muscles aching with the satisfying fatigue of purposeful labor. Walter joined when his health permitted, the sharing stories about Catherine that filled gaps in the technical documents. She had been brilliant but practical visionary, but grounded, a woman determined to balance innovation with conservation decades before such approaches became mainstream. Rebecca spent her free hours helping Matthew decode Catherine's more cryptic notations, her librarian's patience perfect for the historical detective work. Together, they created a comprehensive timeline of Catherine's discoveries and the Harrington family's countermeasures. The narrative that emerged revealed a systematic campaign to silence Catherine's innovations and exploit the valley's resources without regard for long-term consequences. The most fascinating discovery came while clearing debris from the pumping chamber. Behind a collapsed wall section lay a small room Catherine had apparently used as an emergency workspace. Inside, relatively preserved by the chamber's unique atmospheric conditions, they found a journal detailing Catherine's final days before confronting the Harringtons. She had discovered not just valuable minerals beneath the farm, but a unique hydrological system that naturally concentrated these elements through limestone filtration, a geological rarity that could be harvested sustainably or destroyed through conventional mining. Her innovation had been developing a method to extract these minerals without damaging the ecosystem that created them. The Harringtons' approach, by contrast, would have extracted maximum profit in minimum time, leaving behind toxic runoff and permanently damaged groundwater. Catherine's stand against them hadn't been merely about protecting the Caldwell farm, it had been about preserving an entire watershed for future generations. 1 week into the restoration project, Matthew made the breakthrough they'd been hoping for. After clearing a critical blockage in the main pipeline, water suddenly surged through the system with unexpected force. The sound of rushing liquid through long, dormant pipes created a symphony of renewal beneath the orchard. Matthew traced the flow to the central distribution hub Catherine had designed, watching as gauges dormant for decades sprang back to life, measuring pressure, mineral content, and flow rate. Walter stood transfixed as water emerged from irrigation channels that had been dry for years, seeping into parched soil with patient persistence. Not enough yet to save the entire orchard, but a tangible demonstration that Catherine's system remained viable. She always said the water would find its way home if we just removed the barriers. That night, a representative from the state's agricultural college visited the farm, intrigued by reports of Catherine's methods. Barrow, Elaine Foster, a hydrologist with particular expertise in sustainable farming, spent hours examining the newly flowing system, her initial skepticism transforming to genuine excitement. This isn't just ahead of its time, it's beyond current best practices. The integration of natural filtration with mechanical distribution is elegantly revolutionary. If we could implement this methodology valley-wide, it would transform agricultural water usage across the state. Matthew shared Catherine's complete designs, including her plans for valley-wide implementation. Dr. Foster's enthusiasm confirmed what they had begun to suspect. Catherine Hayes hadn't merely been a talented engineer. She had been a visionary whose work, properly implemented, could still revolutionize sustainable agriculture 6 decades later. As promising as these developments were, opposition soon emerged from predictable quarters. While Victor Harrington remained hospitalized, his network of influence activated through proxies. The bank called Walter about accelerating loan payments. Town council members suddenly questioned permits for the restoration work. Suppliers delayed delivery of crucial components without explanation. Most concerning, a legal notice arrived claiming Catherine's water management design had been sold to a Harrington subsidiary in 1957, making their current implementation potential patent infringement. The document bore a signature purporting to be Catherine's, dated the day before her disappearance. Rebecca took one look at the signature and scoffed. "This isn't Catherine's handwriting. I've been studying her journals for weeks now." Matthew contacted Agent Chen, who dispatched a forensic document examiner to analyze the contract. The results confirmed their suspicions. The signature had been forged clumsily enough to be identified decades later, despite paper aging. While legal maneuvers played out, Matthew continued the physical restoration work. Emma had returned to school, coming home each afternoon with increasingly confident steps. Her initial trauma from witnessing Victor's attack had transformed into determined resilience. She appointed herself project historian, documenting each day's progress with photographs and careful notes that displayed her inherited Hayes precision. Scout remained her constant protector, walking her to the school bus each morning and waiting at the end of the drive each afternoon, his training apparent in his alert vigilance. The dog had developed a curious habit in recent days, regularly visiting the convergence point where water now flowed steadily, sitting in contemplative stillness, as if listening to something beneath the surface. On a brisk autumn morning 2 weeks into the project, Alexander Harrington's black Range Rover appeared at the farm entrance. Matthew tensed immediately, the scout moving to alert position beside him. But Alexander emerged alone, without his father's imperious confidence, looking strangely diminished in casual clothes rather than his customary tailored suit. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm here to make things right, or at least less wrong." Matthew maintained cautious distance, keenly aware that Alexander had pulled a gun on him during their last encounter. But something had changed in the younger Harrington, his usual calculated poise replaced with the awkward sincerity of someone unused to genuine remorse. Alexander handed over a flash drive and a set of keys. "The drive contains all Meridian Lake's geological surveys of the valley, including the ones my grandfather commissioned after Catherine disappeared. The keys are to our records storage facility where we've kept documentation of everything. Everything meaning 6 decades of environmental manipulation, property acquisition through coercion, and potential evidence regarding Catherine's fate." Why now? Alexander's practice polish cracked further, revealing unexpected vulnerability. "Near-death experiences clarify priorities. I always told myself we were developing the valley, creating prosperity. The truth is we've been poisoning it for 3 generations." Matthew remained skeptical of this convenient conversion, but Alexander continued with uncomfortable authenticity. "My father will never face proper justice. His health, his connections. The system wasn't designed to punish men like Victor Harrington. But that doesn't mean the truth should stay buried." Before departing, Alexander hesitated, then shared one final revelation. "My grandfather kept a private journal. It's in the storage facility. He documented everything about Catherine Hayes, including what happened at the North Ridge. You deserve to know." After Alexander left, Matthew and Rebecca drove immediately to the storage facility, a climate-controlled warehouse outside town limits. The keys opened a section containing dozens of bankers' boxes, meticulously labeled by year, creating a paper trail of corruption spanning 60 years. In the oldest section, a locked cabinet yielded a leather-bound journal with the initials VHS Victor Harrington Sr. The account it contained confirmed their worst fears and vindicated Catherine completely. Victor Sr. had documented his confrontation with Catherine at the farm, her escape through the underground pump system, and his men's pursuit. Catherine, injured but determined, had evaded them for 3 days before succumbing to her wounds near the North Ridge. Victor Sr. had found her body and buried it in an unmarked location to protect his family's reputation and business interests. Most damning, the journal detailed his subsequent systematic dismantling of Catherine's water management system and deliberate contamination of strategic properties to force sales at depressed prices. What began as covering up a single crime had evolved into decades of environmental destruction and community manipulation. Rebecca's hands trembled as she closed the journal. This isn't just evidence in an environmental case. It's a confession to manslaughter, possibly murder. Matthew contacted Agent Chen immediately. Within hours, a forensic team arrived to secure the storage facility and its contents. The investigation had escalated from environmental crimes to potential homicide, with the journal providing the missing link between Catherine's disappearance and the Harrington family's subsequent activities. While authorities processed this new evidence, Matthew returned to the farm with renewed determination to complete Catherine's work. The most challenging aspect remained restoring the main underground pump chamber, the heart of her system where multiple water sources converged. The chamber had been partially flooded since their confrontation with Victor, and draining it without damaging the delicate balance of the system required careful engineering. Walter, Rebecca, and Dr. Foster joined Matthew in planning the operation, each contributing expertise to the complex problem. Decades of silt had accumulated in critical channels, mechanical components needed replacement, and the control system required modern updating while maintaining Catherine's original design principles. Emma, having appointed herself apprentice engineer, suggested a solution with characteristic directness. Why don't we just ask Scout where to start? He always knows. The adults exchanged skeptical glances, but Matthew had learned to trust both his daughter's intuition and Scout's inexplicable awareness. The German Shepherd had consistently identified critical junctures in Catherine's system, often before the humans recognized their significance. Scout led them to a previously unnoticed access panel near the processing facility's eastern foundation. The panel, concealed by decades of overgrowth, opened to reveal a secondary drainage system designed specifically for maintaining the main chamber. Catherine had engineered redundancy into her system, anticipating potential flooding scenarios. Following Scout's discovery, Matthew implemented a controlled drainage operation, carefully monitoring pressure changes to prevent collapse in the aging structure. As water levels decreased, Catherine's control center emerged an engineering marvel combining mechanical gauges with natural indicators. Limestone formations had been incorporated into measurement systems, changing color as mineral concentrations fluctuated. Pressure release valves mimicked natural geothermal functions, creating a hybrid system that worked with geological processes rather than against them. Dr. Foster documented everything with professional reverence. She's created a biomimetic engineering system decades before the concept existed in mainstream science. This could revolutionize how we approach watershed management nationwide. The draining operation required 3 days of constant monitoring, Matthew catching sleep in short bursts between critical phases. By the third evening, the chamber stood mostly dry, revealing a control panel that would have looked more at home in a modern environmental engineering facility than a 1950s farm building. Walter descended into the chamber for the first time since its discovery, emotion overwhelming him as he touched the console Catherine had designed. She built all this herself, ordered parts from 5 different states to avoid suspicion, assembled everything at night after working in the fields all day. Rebecca, analyzing the control panel's layout, made another significant discovery. A hidden compartment beneath the main console contained Catherine's final engineering journal, water-damaged but largely legible. The entries detailed her growing concern about the Harrington family's interest in the minerals beneath the farm, culminating in her decision to confront them directly. Most valuable was a complete schematic for the valley-wide implementation of her water management system. Catherine had mapped every property waterway and geological formation, creating a master plan for sustainable water usage that would have transformed the region's agricultural capacity while preserving its natural resources. The journal's final entry, dated the day of her disappearance, revealed her ultimate motivation. "I don't fight for ownership, but for stewardship. Land doesn't belong to us. We belong to it briefly, with responsibility to leave it better than we found it. If my system works as designed, this valley will nourish generations long after the Harringtons and I are dust." Matthew shared the discovery with Agent Chen, whose investigation had expanded to include a multi-agency task force focusing on the environmental crimes spanning decades. Chen arranged for federal agricultural and environmental specialists to evaluate Catherine's valley-wide implementation plan using modern analytical methods. Their preliminary assessment exceeded even Dr. Foster's optimistic projections. Catherine's system, with minimal modernization, could restore the valley's ecological balance while establishing a model for sustainable water management applicable to agricultural regions nationwide. What had begun as restoring a single farm had evolved into potentially transforming agricultural practices across the country. This broader significance attracted media attention that Victor Harrington's arrest hadn't. Environmental journalists, sustainable agriculture advocates, and engineering publications requested access to Catherine's work. Matthew and Walter carefully controlled information flow, ensuring Catherine received proper credit while protecting key implementation details until legal matters resolved. Amid this growing recognition, the sheriff delivered news they had been both dreading and hoping for. Based on Victor Harrington Sr.'s journal and ground-penetrating radar surveys, authorities had located what appeared to be human remains near the North Ridge, consistent with Catherine's described burial location. Forensic anthropologists would need time for proper excavation and identification, but preliminary findings aligned with the timeline of her disappearance. Walter received this news with quiet dignity, masking profound grief. Not knowing had been its own kind of pain. Confirmation would bring closure, but also finality to any lingering hope, however irrational, that the brilliant woman he'd loved might somehow have survived. While authorities processed this somber discovery, Matthew continued implementing Catherine's design, focusing on the central distribution node that would eventually connect to neighboring properties in the valley-wide vision. The work provided purpose through grief, hands kept busy while hearts processed complex emotions. Emma, with characteristic resilience, found her own way to honor Catherine's memory. She had begun collecting oral histories from elderly residents who remembered Catherine, creating a human portrait to complement the technical brilliance documented in journals and designs. The community response surprised everyone. As word spread about Catherine's innovations and the Harrington family's systematic suppression of her work, neighbors began appearing at the Caldwell farm offering assistance. Farmers brought equipment, retired engineers volunteered expertise, high school students arrived after classes to clear debris and repair fencing. What had begun as one family's restoration project had transformed into community reclamation. Matthew watched with quiet amazement as people who had lived under Harrington influence for generations reclaimed agency through collective action. The sheriff arrived one evening as volunteers departed, expression grim but resolved. We've confirmed the remains belong to Catherine Hayes. Forensic evidence supports Victor Sr.'s account of her death from injuries sustained during the confrontation. We've reopened the case as a homicide investigation. Walter received this confirmation with the strange mixture of grief and vindication that comes when long-held suspicions are finally validated. For 60 years, I knew she wouldn't leave willingly. Now everyone else will know too. The following morning brought another unexpected visitor, Senator Eleanor Bradshaw, head of the Senate Agricultural Committee and champion of sustainable farming legislation. The senator had learned about Catherine's innovations from Dr. Foster and arrived with minimal entourage but maximum authority, her practical pantsuits and direct manner reflecting her family's farming background. She surveyed the property with practiced assessment, asking technical questions that revealed genuine understanding rather than political performance. After inspecting Catherine's restored control chamber, she turned to Matthew with newfound respect. What you've uncovered here isn't just historically significant. It's immediately relevant to current agricultural challenges nationwide. How quickly can you implement the valley-wide system? The question's scope momentarily stunned Matthew. He had been focused on restoring the Caldwell farm with Catherine's broader vision as a future aspiration rather than immediate goal. Proper implementation would require substantial resources, regulatory approvals, and cooperation from multiple landowners. Senator Bradshaw anticipated his concerns. I've reviewed the environmental impact assessments. My committee can fast-track federal approval. The USDA has grant funding available for watershed restoration projects. The EPA is already investigating the contamination angle. What you need is project coordination and political muscle against remaining Harrington influences. I can provide both. Rebecca, who had arrived with historical documentation for the senator's team, recognized the significance immediately. This could complete Catherine's vision quickly as she intended, but with modern resources she never had access to. Walter, witnessing this exchange, spoke with quiet conviction. Catherine always said her designs weren't just for us, they were for everyone. She would want this. As these promising developments unfolded, opposition emerged from predictable quarters. While Victor remained hospitalized under guard, his attorneys filed motions challenging the admissibility of evidence from the storage facility. Bank officers loyal to the Harrington family attempted to call loans on several properties critical to the valley-wide implementation. Anonymous threats arrived at the farm and Senator Bradshaw's office. Most concerning equipment began malfunctioning in patterns suggesting deliberate sabotage. Pressure gauges failed simultaneously. Newly installed pipes developed mysterious leaks. A section of restored irrigation channel collapsed overnight, showing evidence of intentional structural damage. Sheriff Jackson increased patrols near the farm, but the property's size made comprehensive security impossible. Matthew implemented military-grade monitoring procedures, drawing on his combat engineering experience to establish perimeter alerts and critical system redundancies. Scout proved invaluable in this security effort, his sensitivity to unusual sounds and movements providing early warning of intrusions. The dog seemed to have developed an almost supernatural awareness of the property's rhythms, alerting to disturbances before visible evidence appeared. Emma, despite Matthew's attempts to shield her from these tensions, absorbed everything with observant silence. She began having nightmares about Victor Harrington, returning waking in tears that broke Matthew's heart. Rebecca suggested art therapy, and Emma filled sketchbooks with drawings of the farm, not as it currently existed, but as it might look: fully restored cherry trees in full bloom and water flowing freely through Catherine's system. The drawings revealed hope persisting through fear, her innate optimism providing perspective, the adults sometimes lost in daily struggles. One particular sketch showed Catherine as Emma imagined her standing beside the convergence point with water flowing around her. The caption in Emma's careful handwriting: "The water remembers her." Walter kept this drawing in his pocket, a talisman of sorts, as legal battles intensified. Victor's legal team had transitioned from denial to delay tactics, hoping to outlast public interest and political momentum. Meanwhile, Alexander continued providing evidence against his father and Meridian Lake, his cooperation extending beyond legal necessity to what appeared genuine atonement. 3 weeks into the restoration project, Matthew made the discovery that would shift everything again. While reinforcing the main convergence chamber, he uncovered a sealed compartment Catherine had constructed beneath the primary control panel. Inside lay a metal container holding a complete contingency implementation plan, alternate routes, secondary water sources, and most crucially, legal documentation establishing easement rights across the valley properties. Catherine, anticipating Harrington interference, had secured notarized agreements from original property owners granting water access rights in perpetuity. These easements had never been contested or revoked, merely buried beneath decades of Harrington manipulation. Rebecca verified their legal standing. Through county records, Catherine's foresight had created an unbreakable foundation for her valley-wide vision. Senator Bradshaw's legal team confirmed the easements remained enforceable, effectively neutralizing the primary obstacle to implementation. With access rights legally established and federal support secured through the senator's influence, the project advanced from theoretical to imminent. The day after this legal breakthrough, Matthew woke to unexpected silence. The gentle background rhythm of water flowing through restored pipes, now a constant presence at the farm, had ceased. He knew immediately something was wrong, the absence of sound more alarming than any mechanical warning could have been. Scout led him directly to the problem. The main control junction had been completely sabotaged overnight. Valves wrenched from mountings, gauges, smashed electrical components doused with water. The damage pattern revealed professional knowledge of the system's vulnerabilities, suggesting someone with both engineering background and intimate familiarity with Catherine's design. Sheriff Jackson arrived quickly, documenting the destruction with grim efficiency. This isn't random vandalism. Someone wanted to make absolutely sure the system couldn't be quickly repaired. Security camera footage showed a figure in dark clothing, with face obscured, moving with purpose rather than haste. The methodical destruction suggested someone unworried about discovery, confident in either escape or protection from consequences. Matthew assessed the damage with military detachment, masking deeper anger. The primary control system was inoperable, but Catherine's redundant design provided alternatives. He could reroute through secondary channels, bypassing the damaged section entirely. The system would operate at reduced capacity, but remain functional, precisely the resilience Catherine had engineered. While Matthew implemented these workarounds, Walter made a disturbing discovery in town. Victor Harrington had been released from the hospital to house arrest, his medical condition deemed too complex for standard detention facilities. His palatial home overlooking the valley had effectively become a luxury prison, complete with ankle monitor and regular nurse visits. More concerning, several former Meridian Lake employees had been seen entering the residence despite court orders limiting Victor's visitors to medical personnel and attorneys. Sheriff Jackson promised to investigate, but admitted limited resources and lingering Harrington influence complicated enforcement. That afternoon, Alexander Harrington returned to the farm, agitation visible in his usually composed demeanor. My father's activated his contingency network, longtime employees, contractors, people who owe their livelihoods to Harrington interests. They're systematically targeting the implementation plan. Matthew regarded Alexander with lingering suspicion. How do you know this? Alexander's corporate polish had completely eroded, revealing unexpected humanity beneath. Because I used to coordinate that network. Before I understood what we were really doing to this valley. He handed Matthew a folder containing names, contacts, and locations. These people have specialized knowledge of the water system and access to critical infrastructure. Some of them sabotaged Catherine's original design 60 years ago. The revelation placed their security challenges in stark perspective. They weren't facing random vandalism, but coordinated opposition from people with generational commitment to Harrington interests and technical knowledge to cause maximum damage. Agent Chen arranged federal protection for key infrastructure components, but the valley's size made comprehensive security impossible. Matthew implemented a volunteer monitoring program, enlisting community members in round-the-clock surveillance of critical junctions. The response overwhelmed initial expectations. Dozens of residents volunteered, many bringing stories of how Harrington policies had affected their families across generations. Emma, watching these developments with increasing anxiety, posed the question all the adults had avoided articulating. What if the bad people win again, like they did with Ms. Catherine? The innocent query crystallized the stakes with uncomfortable clarity. History might indeed repeat itself, powerful interests overwhelming individual brilliance, corruption outlasting integrity. Matthew couldn't offer empty reassurances, but he could provide honest perspective. Bad people seem stronger sometimes because they'll do things good people won't. But that's also their weakness. They need secrets and shadows to win. Catherine brought everything into the light, and that's exactly what we're doing now. Rebecca added her own perspective, kneeling to Emma's level. Ms. Catherine didn't lose sweetheart. Her work is living right now through your dad and everyone helping restore her system. The truth just took a little longer to find its way home like the water. The metaphor resonated beyond simple comfort, capturing Catherine's core philosophy. Natural systems eventually find balance despite temporary disruptions. The water would find its path given sufficient time and the removal of artificial barriers. The next morning, Dr. Foster arrived with engineers from 3 universities, each specializing in aspects of Catherine's innovative approach. Their collective expertise would accelerate implementation while documenting the system for educational purposes. Catherine Hayes would finally receive academic recognition for innovations decades ahead of their time. The morning also brought news that shifted legal dynamics significantly. Forensic analysis of Catherine's remains had confirmed not only her identity, but evidence contradicting Victor Harrington Sr.'s journal account. Catherine hadn't died from injuries sustained during the initial confrontation. She had survived for several days, long enough to create a detailed record of events hidden in the cave system where she sought refuge. This final testimony, preserved in a waterproof container similar to others they'd discovered, provided explicit details of Victor Sr.'s role in her assault and subsequent hunt through the property. Most damning, it established premeditation through documented threats predating their final confrontation. Agent Chen delivered this news personally, understanding its profound impact beyond evidentiary value. For Walter, it provided confirmation of Catherine's extraordinary resilience, fighting to document truth even as her physical strength failed. For Matthew, it established direct connection to his great-aunt's determination, the Hayes family persistence, flowing through generations like Catherine's water through limestone. The forensic team requested permission to examine the cave system where Catherine had spent her final days. Matthew led them to the entrance Scout had discovered weeks earlier, a narrow opening behind limestone outcroppings near the creek convergence. The passage widened into a natural chamber where water had carved smooth walls from bedrock over millennia. Catherine had transformed this natural refuge into a final workshop. Faded markings on the walls documented water flow patterns. Stone surfaces had been used for calculations when paper ran out. A natural basin collected drinking water through limestone filtration, sustaining her, while simultaneously demonstrating her design principles. The forensic anthropologist, a compassionate woman whose scientific detachment couldn't quite mask emotional response to Catherine's final stand, moved through the space with reverent professionalism. She had clearly created a geological record, knowing it might outlast paper documentation. Even dying, she remained a scientist, first collecting evidence, establishing patterns, documenting methodology. While authorities processed this new evidence, restoration work continued with renewed purpose. The sabotage control junction required complete redesign, offering opportunity to implement modern components while maintaining Catherine's core principles. Dr. Foster's engineering team developed hybrid solutions combining Catherine's biomimetic approach with contemporary materials and monitoring systems. The following time brought rain, the first significant precipitation since the project began. Water swelled natural channels, testing newly restored infrastructure and revealing weaknesses in temporary repairs. Matthew worked through the deluge, adjusting pressure valves and reinforcing vulnerable junctions while monitoring system response. The storm revealed another unexpected aspect of Catherine's design. As water volume increased, sections of the system, previously dormant, activated, automatically pressure differentials triggering mechanical components without electronic controls. The network responded to changing conditions like a living organism expanding capacity as needed, then returning to baseline configuration when pressure normalized. Dr. Foster documented this responsive functionality with professional amazement. It's hydraulic computing using water pressure itself as both information carrier and response mechanism. She conceptualized cybernetic principles before the field existed in its modern form. The storm continued through the night, Matthew performing hourly checks despite exhaustion. Dawn revealed both challenge and vindication. Several temporary repairs had failed under pressure, but Catherine's core design had performed flawlessly. Water flowed through channels dry for decades, reaching orchards, sections previously written off as unsalvageable. Walter stood in morning mist watching water seep into soil around cherry trees, long considered lost. Some of the older trees which had survived through minimal groundwater showed immediate response buds swelling slightly where branches had seemed dead. Most dramatic was the convergence point where multiple water sources joined before distribution. The limestone formation Catherine had photographed herself beside 60 years earlier now channeled water exactly as she had designed minerals, changing the liquid's color as it flowed through different stone layers. The effect created an ethereal blue-green luminescence in early morning light, beautiful enough to appear almost supernatural, though purely the result of Catherine's scientific understanding of mineral interactions. Emma, witnessing this transformation, expressed what all felt but none had articulated. It's like she knew we would be here someday, needing to see this. The storm's aftermath brought unexpected allies. Farmers from across the valley arrived with equipment and labor, having witnessed water flowing through long, dry creek beds downstream from the Caldwell property. Word spread quickly Catherine's system was functioning beyond the farm's boundaries, already implementing aspects of her valley-wide vision through natural water pathways. A delegation of Chippewa tribal representatives visited the property, having learned of Catherine's work through Senator Bradshaw's office. Their water resources specialist, a woman whose traditional knowledge complemented her environmental engineering degree, recognized parallels between Catherine's approach and indigenous water management practices dating back centuries. She's rediscovered principles our ancestors understood water as connector rather than commodity. The delegation offered both practical assistance and cultural context for Catherine's work, enriching the restoration project with traditional ecological knowledge that aligned perfectly with her biomimetic approach. This expanding coalition created momentum that even Harrington loyalists couldn't entirely obstruct. Several neighboring farms formally requested connection to the restored system, citing historical easements Catherine had established. The Agricultural College established a research station at the convergence point, documenting water quality improvements and soil regeneration rates. As federal involvement increased through Senator Bradshaw's influence, remaining sabotage attempts became less effective and more desperate. Security camera footage captured several incidents, identifying perpetrators with direct connections to Victor Harrington. Sheriff Jackson made arrests, but the coordinated opposition continued through increasingly convoluted channels. Matthew recognized the pattern from counterinsurgency operations. When direct opposition fails, resistance fragments into asymmetric attacks targeting vulnerabilities rather than primary objectives. He implemented corresponding security measures focusing on system resilience rather than prevention of every possible attack. The most significant challenge emerged from an unexpected quarter. Meridian Lake's corporate board, recognizing the company's legal vulnerability, voted to distance themselves from Victor Harrington through dramatic action. They filed an emergency injunction claiming Catherine's system threatened their water treatment facilities downstream, potentially creating environmental hazards requiring immediate cessation of the restoration project. The transparent delay tactic nonetheless required legal response, consuming resources and attention better directed toward implementation. Senator Bradshaw's team provided legal representation, but court proceedings would require Matthew's testimony as project engineer and Walter's as property owner. The evening before scheduled court appearances, Alexander Harrington arrived at the farm with critical information. Meridian Lake's environmental impact claims relied on falsified water quality data his father had commissioned months earlier. Alexander had located the original testing records, showing Catherine's system actually improved downstream water quality rather than degrading it. Matthew accepted the documentation while studying Alexander's increasingly haggard appearance. The Harrington heir had abandoned designer clothing for practical workwear, his previously manicured appearance giving way to stubbled exhaustion. His transformation from corporate antagonist to reluctant ally had acquired convincing authenticity through visible personal cost. My father has disowned me. The family attorney delivered papers yesterday removing me from succession plans and company positions. Alexander's laugh held no humor. Apparently, my mental health crisis makes me unfit for leadership responsibilities. The court hearing proceeded with unexpected efficiency once Alexander presented the falsified documentation and original test results. The judge, a no-nonsense woman with environmental law background, dismissed Meridian Lake's injunction and referred the falsified evidence to federal prosecutors for potential fraud charges. This decisive legal victory created breathing room for implementation to advance without constant defensive maneuvering. Matthew redirected focus to completing the central distribution hub that would eventually connect multiple properties through Catherine's integrated design. Construction required precision excavation where Catherine's original infrastructure interfaced with planned expansions. While supervising this delicate operation, Matthew uncovered another hidden component, a secondary control system Catherine had installed beneath the primary junction, accessible only when water reached specific levels. This redundant control center contained Catherine's most innovative design elements components that would have appeared science fiction in the 1950s, but aligned with contemporary biomimetic engineering principles. She had created a self-adjusting system that learned from water flow patterns, adapting distribution based on historical data stored through mechanical means rather than electronic computation. Dr. Foster documented the discovery with reverent thoroughness, comparing Catherine's mechanical learning system to modern adaptive management algorithms. The parallels were unmistakable despite 60 years separation and entirely different technological approaches. Catherine built a system that could evolve over time, optimizing its own operation through experience rather than external control. She wasn't just ahead of her time, she was operating from an entirely different paradigm of human-natural system integration. That evening, exhausted but satisfied with the day's progress, Matthew found Emma sitting on the porch with Scout sketching the landscape with impressive detail for her age. The drawing showed the farm not as it currently existed, but as it might look, fully restored orchards in bloom water flowing through visible channels, buildings repaired and sunlit. She looked up as he joined her expression, serious beyond her years. "Do you think Miss Catherine knows we fixed her water?" The innocent question contained layers of meaning about legacy, belief systems, connection across time. Matthew considered his response carefully, balancing emotional truth with intellectual honesty. "I think people live on through their ideas and the changes they create in the world. Catherine designed something that's helping this land heal 60 years later. That's a kind of knowing that matters." Emma nodded with the solemn acceptance children sometimes show when adults attempt philosophical complexity. Scout rested his head on her lap, both of them gazing toward the convergence point where water now flowed continuously, carrying Catherine's vision into the present, one molecule at a time. "If Catherine could see us now, I think she'd be proud of what we've done. But mostly I think she'd be excited about what comes next." The farm restoration had evolved beyond memorializing one woman's brilliance to implementing her vision for the valley's future. Catherine's legacy would live not just through restored water flow, but through transformed agricultural practices, environmental restoration, and community reclamation of resources long controlled by narrow interests. Matthew surveyed the property with military assessment, automatically calculating progress metrics, approximately 40% of planned restoration, complete key infrastructure, established critical vulnerabilities identified and addressed. But beneath tactical evaluation flowed deeper currents, connection to family legacy, responsibility, to place commitment to completing what Catherine had begun. The water remembered its paths despite decades of disruption. Perhaps human purpose could demonstrate similar persistence, flowing around obstacles, finding new channels when necessary, but ultimately returning to essential direction. Catherine's vision had waited 60 years for proper implementation. Matthew Hayes had arrived at precisely the moment his great-aunt's innovation could finally transform from brilliant theory to functioning reality. Emma's voice interrupted his thoughts, her observation carrying wisdom beyond her years. Miss Catherine didn't give up, so we can't either. Even when the bad people tried to stop her, she kept finding new ways forward. Some truths required no elaborate adult explanation. Catherine Hayes had persisted against overwhelming opposition, and now her family continued that persistence through new generations. The water found its way home. So would her vision. Spring arrived at the Caldwell farm with explosive vitality, as if nature were making up for lost decades in a single season. Cherry trees once considered dead had produced tender buds, their resurrection a testimony to Catherine's water system and the land's resilience. The first blossoms transformed the previously barren orchards into clouds of delicate white, their fragrance carrying memories that had waited 60 years for acknowledgement. Federal recognition had accelerated the project beyond Matthew's most optimistic projections. Senator Bradshaw's championing had secured emergency conservation funding, allowing implementation of Catherine's valley-wide vision at unprecedented speed. What began as restoring a single farm had evolved into the country's most ambitious watershed reclamation project, with Catherine Hayes posthumously credited as chief architect. Matthew surveyed the expanding operation from the hilltop overlooking the convergence point. Teams of environmental engineers established monitoring stations at key junctions throughout the valley. Neighboring farms had enthusiastically connected to the restored system, their long-suffering orchards already showing signs of revival. The Caldwell property had become both operational headquarters and living laboratory, with agricultural students documenting ecosystem recovery in real time. Most rewarding was watching Emma thrive amid this transformation. She had appointed herself official project photographer, documenting each milestone with meticulous attention to before and after contrasts. Her initial trauma from witnessing Victor's attack had faded, replaced by growing confidence and purpose. The quiet, uncertain child who had arrived in Mapleton had blossomed alongside the cherry trees, finding stability and meaningful work in connection to place. Rebecca had become a steadfast presence in their lives, her initial professional interest in Catherine's work evolving into personal investment in the Hayes Caldwell restoration. She divided her time between archival documentation and practical assistance, creating a comprehensive historical record while helping navigate daily challenges. The time she spent with Emma had particular value, providing feminine guidance that Matthew, for all his dedication, couldn't offer his daughter. Walter experienced perhaps the most profound renewal. Knowledge of Catherine's fate had initially deepened his grief, but the tangible implementation of her vision had transformed mourning into purpose. At 80, he moved through the orchards with renewed vigor, explaining Catherine's methods to visiting experts with proprietary pride. His cafe had become unofficial project headquarters walls, now covered with Catherine's designs and photographs of implementation progress. The evening of the first full cherry blossom bloom, Walter hosted a small gathering at the farm. Dr. Foster's engineering team joined Senator Bradshaw's environmental advisors, agricultural college researchers, and neighboring farmers whose properties had connected to the system. Matthew watched their animated discussions with quiet satisfaction, recognizing the community Catherine had envisioned forming around her innovation. Emma tugged at his sleeve, pointing toward the orchard's edge, where scouts sat in characteristic, alert stillness, ears forward and gaze fixed on the convergence point. Dad Scout keeps going there every day at sunset. I think he's listening to Miss Catherine. Matthew had noticed the dog's ritual without attaching supernatural significance. Scout's military training had included detecting subtle vibrations and pressure changes, precisely what occurred in the water system during daily temperature fluctuations. The dog was likely responding to the system's mechanical rhythms rather than ghostly presence. Yet the convergence point did possess undeniable atmospheric quality at sunset. Light filtered through limestone formations created prismatic effects where water surfaced briefly before returning underground. Mineral deposits left iridescent patterns along stone edges, capturing sunlight in ways that seemed deliberately designed for aesthetic appreciation alongside technical function. Perhaps some pieces of knowledge should remain mysterious. If water remembered its path through stone, perhaps stone remembered those who had shaped its purpose. The following morning brought news that shifted focus from celebration to renewed vigilance. Victor Harrington had suffered another stroke, this one severe enough to leave him comatose. His medical prognosis remained uncertain, but his legal circumstances had changed dramatically. With competency hearings indefinitely postponed, prosecution strategy required adjustment. Most concerning was the power vacuum created within the Harrington Empire. Alexander, officially disowned and removed from succession, no longer provided insight into internal operations. Loyalists who had remained quiet during Victor's house arrest now emerged with more aggressive tactics, perhaps sensing opportunity in leadership transition. Senator Bradshaw convened an emergency security briefing at the farm, bringing federal marshals to assess vulnerabilities. While Catherine's core system had been fully restored, the expanded implementation created new exposure points across the valley. Complete protection would require resources beyond local capacity. The security team identified three critical vulnerabilities requiring immediate hardening. The primary distribution hub, where original infrastructure connected to expansion components, needed physical barriers and surveillance. The water testing laboratory required personnel verification protocols and sample handling safeguards. Most crucially, the computerized monitoring system Dr. Foster had integrated with Catherine's mechanical components needed cybersecurity protocols against increasingly sophisticated sabotage attempts. Emma absorbed these discussions with unsettling seriousness, her childhood resilience tempered by realistic understanding of ongoing threats. She had created her own security protocol, deploying scouts' superior senses through systematic property checks at critical times. The dog's military training provided detection capabilities that technology couldn't replicate, particularly for human intruders. Upgraded security measures had barely been implemented when the first coordinated attack occurred. Three separate incidents within 30 minutes suggested professional planning rather than opportunistic vandalism. A power surge targeted the central monitoring system, temporarily disabling electronic components. Simultaneously, equipment malfunctioned at two expansion sites miles apart, suggesting insider knowledge of operational vulnerabilities. Most concerning water quality tests showed trace contaminants introduced at a specific junction, not dangerous levels, but precise enough to trigger regulatory review that would delay further expansion. Someone with intimate understanding of environmental regulations had calculated the minimum contamination necessary to create maximum administrative obstacles. Matthew recognized the tactics from counterinsurgency operations, asymmetric opposition, designed to exhaust resources through multiple minor disruptions rather than single catastrophic attack. The response required similar asymmetric thinking, defending critical nodes while allowing flexibility elsewhere. Sheriff Jackson's investigation identified three former Meridian Lake employees with specialized knowledge of water systems and regulatory procedures. All had received substantial bank transfers from a Harrington family trust the previous day, creating clear connection between Victor's associates and the coordinated sabotage. While legal proceedings advanced against these operatives, Matthew focused on hardening the system against future attacks. Catherine's mechanical redundancies provided natural resilience against electronic disruption. The challenge lay in balancing security needs against the open access philosophy central to her design. Catherine had created a system meant to serve the entire valley without gatekeepers or controllers, directly opposing the Harrington model of resource monopolization. Rebecca discovered an elegant solution in Catherine's original designs. The secondary control system utilized natural security measures through biodistinctive access protocols. Critical valves responded to specific pressure sequences, essentially mechanical passwords, that Catherine had documented using botanical terminology rather than technical specifications. Without the translation key, which Rebecca had reconstructed through exhaustive archival research, even someone with engineering expertise couldn't override core system functions. Alexander Harrington provided unexpected assistance during the security implementation. Having severed ties with his family's business interests, he utilized insider knowledge to identify potential vulnerabilities in the expanded system. His transformation from antagonist to ally had acquired convincing authenticity through visible personal cost. His family connections destroyed professional identity, abandoned former associates now treating him as pariah. Dr. Foster integrated these historical security protocols with modern monitoring systems, creating a hybrid approach Catherine would have appreciated: natural processes providing fundamental resilience, while technology extended functionality. The result maintained the system's accessibility while protecting against malicious interference. This security redesign had just completed when Senator Bradshaw delivered both promising news and unexpected complication. Federal prosecutors had built an airtight case against Victor Harrington for environmental crimes spanning decades. However, the homicide investigation regarding Catherine's death faced jurisdictional challenges, given its historical nature and Victor's incapacitation. While evidence clearly established the Harrington family's responsibility, direct accountability through criminal proceedings remained uncertain. Walter received this news with philosophical acceptance, shaped by 60 years navigating Harrington influence. Catherine's vindication was ultimately more important than Victor's punishment. The system she designed would outlive both its creator and those who tried to destroy it, a more meaningful justice than any court could provide. The project's growing national recognition provided additional protection against local interference. Environmental journalists published features on Catherine's innovations and their contemporary relevance. Engineering publications analyzed her biomimetic approaches that had anticipated current sustainable design principles by decades. Agricultural specialists documented crop revival throughout the valley as her water system restored natural balance to long-depleted soil. Most significantly, the University of Michigan's engineering department established the Catherine Hayes Memorial Scholarship for women pursuing environmental engineering degrees. The announcement ceremony held at the Convergence Point on the Caldwell Farm drew academic dignitaries, government officials, and media attention that transformed Catherine from forgotten innovator to celebrated pioneer. Emma attended this ceremony with appropriate seriousness, absorbing the formal recognition of the woman whose legacy had transformed her family's trajectory. She had created her own tribute through a carefully assembled photo essay documenting the system's restoration, capturing both technical implementation and human connections formed through collaborative work. The morning after this celebration, Matthew woke to Scout's distinctive alert barking, three sharp sounds signaling potential intrusion. The dog stood at attention beside Emma's bedroom door, his focused intensity triggering Matthew's immediate combat response. He found Emma's room empty, her bed clearly unslept in since being made the previous evening. A single sheet of paper lay on her pillow, Scout's paw print, pressed into one corner alongside Emma's careful handwriting. Dad, Scout heard something at the Convergence Point. Going to check. Back soon. The timestamp showed 1:17 a.m. over 6 hours earlier. Matthew activated emergency protocols with military efficiency, notifying Sheriff Jackson and Walter while grabbing tactical equipment from his storage cabinet. Rebecca arrived within minutes of his call, her librarian's methodical nature perfect for coordinating information flow, while Matthew led physical search operations. Scout tracked Emma's scent directly to the Convergence Point, confirming her notes information. The area showed signs of recent activity, disturbed soil, water flow patterns, altered, and most concerning adult footprints alongside Emma's smaller impressions. The trail led toward the cave system where Catherine had sought refuge 60 years earlier. Sheriff Jackson's deputies established perimeter security while Matthew and Scout followed the tracks into the cave entrance. The passage had been enlarged during forensic investigation of Catherine's remains, allowing easier access than during her desperate flight. Solar-powered lights installed by research teams illuminated the main chamber where Catherine had spent her final days. The space stood empty, equipment from various research teams neatly organized against limestone walls. No immediate evidence indicated Emma's presence, but Scout's behavior changed noticeably, his alert tension transforming to focused tracking as he moved toward a narrow passage previously considered impassable. Recent rock displacement had created an opening just large enough for Emma's small frame to navigate. An adult would have struggled to follow, explaining why research teams hadn't explored this extension of the cave system. Scout whined with frustrated loyalty, too large to follow Emma's path, but clearly detecting her scent. Matthew assessed options with combat-honed clarity. The passage appeared to widen beyond the initial constriction, suggesting he could create adequate clearance with careful excavation. Scout's behavior indicated Emma had passed through willingly rather than under duress, providing crucial distinction between rescue and recovery scenarios. Working with controlled urgency. Matthew cleared the passage entry while Sheriff Jackson coordinated surface operations, establishing communication protocols, and staging emergency medical resources. The removal of several key stones created sufficient clearance for Matthew to navigate the passage, Scout following close behind once space permitted. The narrow tunnel extended approximately 20 feet before opening into a previously undiscovered chamber, nearly twice the size of the documented main cave. The space possessed extraordinary acoustic properties, water dripping from limestone formations, creating melodic patterns that resonated through the chamber. Natural light filtered through a small opening in the distant ceiling, illuminating crystalline mineral deposits with prismatic effects. Emma sat near the chamber's center, completely absorbed in examining a remarkable geological formation. A natural limestone table where mineral-rich water had created a topographical map of the valley through sedimentary deposition. The three-dimensional representation mirrored Catherine's system design with uncanny precision, suggesting she might have discovered this chamber and based her engineering on natural patterns documented in stone. "Dad, you need to see this." Emma showed no awareness of the panic her disappearance had caused, entirely captivated by her discovery. "It's a map of Miss Catherine's water system, but made by the water itself. The cave made the blueprint before she even designed it." Matthew's relief at finding Emma unharmed battled with parental frustration at her obliviousness to danger. The scientific significance of her discovery was unquestionable. Catherine Hayes hadn't created her design from abstract engineering principles, but from direct observation of natural systems perfectly adapted to the valley's unique geology. Emma continued with enthusiastic explanation, pointing out correspondences between the limestone formation and Catherine's documented designs. Scout circled the chamber with professional thoroughness, checking for additional passages or potential hazards. His behavior indicated no immediate threats, but his persistent interest in one particular wall section suggested something warranted investigation. Behind Scout, obscured by shadows and mineral deposits, lay another remarkable discovery, a small alcove where Catherine had apparently conducted final observations before her death. A weathered leather case contained water-damaged but partially legible notes documenting the chamber's geological significance. Catherine had indeed discovered this space and recognized its profound implications for water management throughout the valley. Most significant was a sealed glass container holding Catherine's final message, a letter addressed to future discoverers of the chamber, explaining its scientific importance and expressing hope that someone would eventually implement the water management system it had inspired. The message concluded with words that bridged 60 years. "If you've found this chamber, you've understood what I recognized here. Natural systems contain wisdom beyond human design. My engineering is an invention, but translation of patterns already perfected through geological time. Water remembers the path of least resistance while achieving maximum nourishment. Human systems would benefit from similar wisdom." This final validation of Catherine's approach represented scientific vindication far beyond personal legacy. The chamber proved her revolutionary design hadn't emerged solely from individual brilliance, but from genuine partnership with natural systems observation and adaptation rather than imposition and control. Matthew contacted the surface team, explaining both Emma's safety and the chamber's significance. Dr. Foster assembled a documentation team with appropriate archaeological and geological expertise, while Rebecca coordinated access protocols to ensure proper preservation of the site. As morning light strengthened through the ceiling aperture, the limestone map revealed additional details: seasonal flow patterns, mineral deposit variations, and subtle elevation changes, creating natural filtration systems. Catherine's genius lay not in creating something new, but in recognizing patterns already established through millennia of water flow. This profound understanding of natural systems explained why her design had survived 60 years of neglect and deliberate sabotage. She hadn't fought natural forces, but aligned with them, creating resilience through integration rather than resistance. The principle extended beyond water management to community organization, agricultural practices, and environmental restoration, a comprehensive approach to sustainability decades before the concept entered mainstream consciousness. Emma's discovery transformed scientific understanding of Catherine's work and provided critical insight for implementing the valley-wide system. The limestone formation demonstrated seasonal variations that Catherine's notes had referenced, but modern engineers hadn't fully appreciated. Dr. Foster immediately recognized implications for flow management during drought cycles and flood conditions, enhancing system adaptability beyond original implementation plans. The chamber's existence remained restricted knowledge, its location protected from potential Harrington interference. Only essential research personnel received access clearance, with Scout maintaining unofficial security through his regular presence during Emma's approved visits. The dog had developed particular attachment to the space, often sitting beside the limestone formation in characteristic alert stillness. 1 month after Emma's discovery, Victor Harrington died without regaining consciousness, his passing barely noted in community, more focused on watershed restoration than fading power structures. Alexander attended the small private service alone, the family's former associates conspicuously absent now that Harrington influence provided no advantage. The legal implications of Victor's death rippled through ongoing proceedings. Environmental crime prosecutions continued against corporate entities, but personal accountability remained elusive. The homicide investigation regarding Catherine's death closed officially unsolved, though historical record clearly documented Harrington's responsibility. Walter received this news with quiet reflection rather than disappointment. Catherine's vindication had ultimately come through implementation of her vision rather than punishment of her opponents. The system she designed now flowed through the valley exactly as she had intended its function, her most meaningful memorial. The annual Cherry Blossom Festival, abandoned during decades of orchard decline, returned to Mapleton with record attendance. The Caldwell Farm hosted the main celebration, its orchards displaying the most dramatic revival through Catherine's system. Visitors toured the restoration project. Agricultural students demonstrated water quality testing at the convergence point, and educational displays explained Catherine's biomimetic engineering principles. Emma appointed herself unofficial tour guide, explaining the water system to visitors with surprising technical accuracy complemented by a child's enthusiasm. She had internalized Catherine's core philosophy that understanding natural patterns provides more sustainable solutions than imposing artificial systems. Her explanations emphasize observation and adaptation over control and exploitation, Catherine's fundamental departure from Harrington methodology. The festival culminated with dedication of the Catherine Hayes Water Management Center, a research facility established in the renovated processing building. Senator Bradshaw and university representatives unveiled a bronze plaque commemorating Catherine's innovations, while Dr. Foster announced expanded implementation of her principles in agricultural regions nationwide. During these ceremonies, scouts suddenly alerted moving with purpose toward the convergence point, where festival lighting had created spectacular effects in flowing water. Matthew followed, expecting security concerns, but found the dog sitting peacefully beside the main channel, watching prismatic patterns with unusual intensity. The water flow had created a momentary equilibrium state Catherine had documented in her final notes. Perfect balance between pressure, mineral content, and distribution rate. This rare alignment produced distinct coloration and sound as water moved through limestone formations, creating both visual beauty and acoustic harmony that seemed deliberately designed for human appreciation. Emma joined them, her expression showing understanding beyond her years. She's here now, isn't she? Not like a ghost, but in the system working the way she designed it. The observation captured essential truth about legacy. Ideas properly implemented outlive their creators, continuing to shape reality long after physical presence ends. Catherine Hayes lived now in restored orchards, flowing water, and a young girl's understanding of relationship between human ingenuity and natural wisdom. Rebecca arrived with Walter, who stood transfixed by the convergence point's transformation. He had witnessed this phenomenon only once before during Catherine's initial testing of the system 60 years earlier. The precise alignment of conditions occurred, rarely requiring specific temperature, pressure, and mineral saturation, achievable only when the entire system functioned exactly as designed. She called it the moment of perfect conversation, when human engineering and natural processes speak the same language. 1 month after the festival, Matthew received unexpected correspondence from Alexander Harrington. Following his father's death, Alexander had gained access to private family archives previously hidden even from him. Among these materials, he discovered correspondence between Victor Harrington Sr. and Catherine Hayes predating their final confrontation. The letters revealed Catherine had attempted cooperation before opposition, offering partnership in sustainable mineral extraction that would preserve agricultural viability while accessing valuable resources. Victor Sr. had rejected this approach, committed to extraction methods that maximize short-term profit regardless of environmental consequences. This historical context completed Catherine's story, confirming she had sought collaborative solutions before taking adversarial stance. Her vision hadn't been merely technical innovation, but fundamentally different relationship between human enterprise and natural systems partnership rather than exploitation, sustainability rather than depletion. Alexander requested permission to document this history as part of personal atonement for his family's actions. He had established an environmental restoration foundation, using his inheritance to implement Catherine's principles in regions damaged by extractive industries nationwide. Matthew shared this development with Walter, who recognized its significance beyond personal vindication. Catherine's approach had always extended beyond single property or individual legacy. The implementation of her principles by the Harrington heir represented completion of cycles she had initiated, transformation of exploitation to stewardship through generational learning. The first cherry harvest since system restoration exceeded all projections both in quantity and quality. Trees previously considered unsalvageable produced fruit with distinctive character, resulting from Catherine's mineral-enriched water. University analysis confirmed unique flavor profiles created through her filtration system, with mineral composition impossible to replicate through conventional agricultural methods. Walter established a specialty processing operation, producing limited edition preserves from these exceptional cherries, naming the product line Catherine's Convergence, in tribute to both the woman and the system she designed. The proceeds funded scholarships for young women pursuing environmental science and engineering degrees, extending Catherine's influence through educational opportunity. Emma participated enthusiastically in harvest operations, documenting the process through increasingly sophisticated photography that captured both technical aspects and human connections. Her growing confidence and purpose reflected the farm's transformation renewal, emerging from neglect direction, replacing uncertainty legacy, providing foundation for future innovation. Autumn brought final validation of Catherine's vision when the Environmental Protection Agency designated the Mapleton watershed as national model for sustainable agricultural water management. The official report cited Catherine Hayes's biomimetic engineering principles as foundational methodology for addressing similar challenges nationwide, particularly in regions facing climate-related water scarcity. Senator Bradshaw announced federal funding for 10 implementation sites across the country, each adapting Catherine's approach to specific regional conditions. Dr. Foster would oversee technical aspects, while Walter Caldwell provided historical context, ensuring Catherine's core philosophy remained central to expanded applications. Matthew surveyed these developments from the hilltop overlooking the convergence point, professional satisfaction complemented by personal fulfillment. The military engineering skills that had once built temporary structures in conflict zones now established permanent infrastructure supporting ecological balance and community prosperity. Emma joined him, scout following with characteristic vigilance, softened by growing comfort in their established home. The dog had appointed himself unofficial guardian of the convergence point, maintaining regular patrol patterns that included Catherine's cave and the limestone formations she had studied. The water flowing through channels Catherine designed carried memory not just of geological formations, but of human vision translated into physical reality. 60 years between concept and implementation hadn't diminished her innovation's relevance, perhaps had even enhanced it as environmental understanding caught up with her intuitive recognition of natural patterns. Emma's question reflected this continuity across time. Do you think Ms. Catherine knew people would eventually understand what she was trying to build? Matthew considered the woman who had documented her discoveries even while dying, preserving knowledge for future generations who might implement what she couldn't complete herself. The question wasn't whether Catherine had hoped for eventual understanding, but whether those who received her legacy would prove worthy of it. The water remembers, but only if we're willing to listen to what it's telling us. Catherine heard something in these patterns that most people missed. Our job is making sure others can hear it too. They watched sunset transform the valley Catherine had mapped through patient observation and translated through brilliant engineering. Her system now connected properties throughout the region, creating shared resource where Harrington influence had once established artificial scarcity. Water flowed without regard for property lines or power structures, following patterns established through geological time rather than human ownership. Scouts suddenly alerted ears forward and body tense with familiar vigilance. But rather than danger, his attention focused on the limestone formation, where water created momentary rainbow as sunset light struck mineral deposits. The effect lasted seconds before fading, but its impression remained beauty, emerging from function, natural systems, expressing mathematical precision through visual harmony. The dog relaxed, settling beside Emma with contented vigilance. They had found their place within patterns larger than themselves, continuing work begun before their arrival that would extend beyond their departure. The water remembered its proper channels despite decades of disruption, Human purpose could demonstrate similar persistence. Walter joined them, his weathered face reflecting both the day's physical exertion and lifetime's emotional journey. He carried a tray with glasses of fresh cider pressed from the orchard's first full harvest. Since restoration, a tangible manifestation of Catherine's vision, finally implemented. Rebecca completed their gathering, bringing documentation of the cave chamber's limestone formation that would extend understanding of Catherine's methodology to future researchers. Her archival instincts had preserved historical connections that might otherwise have been lost, linking Catherine's innovations to both geological past and sustainable future. Together, they watched twilight transform the valley Catherine had mapped through patient observation and brilliant engineering. Her system now connected properties throughout the region, creating shared resource, where Harrington influence had once established artificial scarcity. Water flowed without regard for property lines or power structures, following patterns established through geological time rather than human ownership. Some truths wrote themselves in stone, waiting for those who learned to read their language. Catherine Hayes had translated that ancient text into contemporary application, creating a bridge between natural wisdom and human innovation. The Hayes family had completed implementation 60 years later, closing circle Catherine had opened against overwhelming opposition. The water remembered, and now so did everyone else.